Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Unit Testing for Project Managers. My name is Roy Sarkar, and I'll be your host for this amazing session on the what, why, when, and how of effective unit testing, presented by Cal Evans. First, a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have a question, you can use the question and answer tool on the right side of your screen, and we will answer them throughout the broadcast. Also note that today's presentation is being recorded and will be available online following the webcast. We will also provide the slides on SlideShare. Now I'd like to introduce Cal Evans. From the early days of the TRS-80 Model 1 to modern-day PHP on Linux, Mac, and Windows, Cal has built a variety of projects ranging from simple web pages to multi-million-dollar web applications. When not wearing a very colorful hat as technical manager for training and certification at RogueWave Software, Cal can be found at Nomad PHP, giving motivational developer talks around the world, authoring books, and graciously accepting shots of bourbon at any conference you see him at. Take it away, Cal.
Thank you, Roy. Hey, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you find some value in the time we spend together today. As Roy said, my name is Cal Evans. I'm the Technical Manager of Training and Certification here at RogueWave. If you are a ZCE or ZFCE, that's the program that I run. I work with a great little group of nuts that puts all of these all these training programs together. I have been programming for 36, that can't be right. Check the math. Oh my God, I've been programming for 36 years. Anything from Visual Basic for DOS, yes, Visual Basic for DOS, up through Fox Pro, Delphi, and I have settled on PHP and MySQL for the past 15 years. It's been able to solve all the problems that I've needed to solve for the past 15 years. Now, before we go any further, I will say that when we did the rehearsal, they told me I talked too fast. Well, that's because I value your time, and I want to get this done in enough time so that you've got time to ask questions or anything else. I don't want to waste any of your time. So if I talk too fast, then I apologize. If you're trying to take notes, don't bother. This whole recording will be posted this afternoon or tomorrow on the website. You can always rewatch it at any point, pick up any of the things that I mentioned. So just sit back, enjoy, hang on, and let's talk about unit testing. First of all, here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about exactly what unit testing is. Then after I explain that to you, I'm going to explain to you why your team should bother writing them. And then, okay, you'll get the why and the what, but now when should your team start writing unit tests? And then finally, we're going to talk about the most important part, how do your teams go about writing unit tests? And that's really all we're going to do today. And then I'm going to leave some time at the end for any questions and answers. Now, as I said, I talk fast, and I'm not bothering to look at the questions panel. I've got it minimized right over there. I'm totally ignoring it. But Roy is keeping an eye on that. And if you have a question, type it in the questions panel. Roy will rudely interrupt me no matter what I'm saying, and he will ask me the question. I'll do my best to either answer you truthfully or make something up. It's up to you to figure out which. So, first off, we've got a poll. Please give it up for my partner in crime, Mr. Roy Sarkar. Roy, what's our poll for the first one?
So here's our first rude interruption. Our first poll is, bring it up here, how many developers do you have in your company? And I would ask our audience to select the appropriate range there. And just some bit of an anecdote on this one. Many think, we're all developers here, and many think the optimal size of a team is really the smallest number necessary to get the work done. And a friend of mine, actually someone who trained me in a Certified Scrum Master course a couple of years ago, had this to say. Imagine you've been given a team of 100 developers and you've been given a really important project to work on. Would you rather have all 100 people working on the project at the same time with good leadership, or find the 7 strongest people who are actually interested in the project, start them working on it, and fire all the rest, spending all the savings and then on the best tools and environment that those 7 people want? So it looks like most people have answered, so we'll share the results for everyone to see. And it looks like, okay, so it looks like we're in the smaller range here, 2 to 10 developers for the most part, and then, 25% at 11 to 50. So, and it's a good spread overall.
Excellent. I love that 2 to 10. That fits right in there with the Jeff Bezos 2 pizza rule. No team should be so large that 2 pizzas can't feed the entire team. So. Anyhow, let's get back to it. Let's talk about what unit testing are. Now, this is just going to be a brief overview because I know I'm talking to managers, and I don't know if I'm talking to developer managers or people that have not had a background in development. And I'm guessing that it's about a 50-50 split, because looking at the GoToWebinar panel, I just saw about half of you check out and say, yeah, I'll come back when you get to the why. So, but let's talk about the what real quick. What is unit testing? Well, unit testing is software development. But more granularly, unit testing is a process in which the smallest testable parts of an application, and we call these units, are individually tested and they're scrutinized for their proper operation. Now that last two words is very important. Proper operation. You want to make sure that everything is behaving the way it should. Now, here's a unit test from an actual project that I'm working on. This is a very simple one, but quite honestly, none of them are much more complex. I use a testing framework called PHP Unit, so I start all of my methods with the word test, and PHP Unit knows that is a test, and it will run this. And the first two things I do is just create two of the objects that are part of my system. Now, the first parameter I pass into all my objects is a database, and since we're not actually testing am I connected to the database and is the database operating correctly, that DB, this DB is what we call a mock, okay? It's an object that acts like the database, it looks like the database, but it's not actually the database. And then, of course, I set the text to message to this is a test message, and I call save, which is really what I'm testing in this whole thing, is being able to save a message. Now, once I do that, I start doing some asserts. Now, in this one, I'm using the assert equals. There's probably about 30 different asserts in PHP Unit, but this one just says make sure that the two parameters that you're passing in equal each other. The first one is message ID. Now, you notice I didn't set message ID anywhere. The save method, when it saves it to the database returns the ID. Now, since I've got a mock, I am all sure that every time I run this, it's going to return me the ID of 1. So I just want to make sure that that worked, because if that worked, save worked. Then I test the message text just to make sure that the save method hasn't messed with it. And the final one is just making sure that the foreign key relations are set the way I expect it to. That's it. That's all a unit test is. And I know you're saying, Cal, it can't be that easy, but quite honestly it is. Now I'm glossing over some of the details, but for the most part, that's all it takes to write unit tests. Now, I run my unit tests, and on this particular project, I have 48 of those methods that start with test, and inside all of them, I have 89 of the assertions for various different things. And I get all my little dots there, and I get a green OK, and that makes me happy. Now, even better is I've got this set up in what we call continuous integration, where every time I check in a major update to GitHub, this automatically runs for me, and it will tell me automatically, yes, everything's working, or no, something's not working. And if something's not working, I don't go to bed till that's green again, okay? I never leave the system checked in a state of build failing. So, the question we're really faced with is not why do unit test. The question really is, what will my projects look like when I adopt unit testing? This is part of the what. You know, what's it going to look like? Well, I can tell you right now, if you're a project manager and you've never done development, this is the process that you're going to be looking at. First, it's going to be chaos. Okay, for the first couple weeks, yeah, it's going to be absolute and utter chaos, because your developer is going to be running around, oh, do I need this, do I need that, what unit testing framework should we standardize on, because there's a bunch of them, and we'll talk about those in a little bit, and everybody's going to have their opinion, and everybody's going to be wanting doing it their way, and it's just going to be madness. And then after about a week, week and a half, I usually find that developers start settling down, they start understanding what needs to be done, and this is what I call the beginnings of understanding. And a lot of developers, if they've never done unit testing, will have an aha moment here. Ah, this is what I mean. This is what it takes. Your senior developers that have already done this, they're probably helping your junior developers. They're now breathing a sigh of relief because the juniors now have an understanding. And then we move on to the stage of organized chaos. Everybody understands what needs to be done. There's still a lot of opinion about how it needs to be done, and so some people are doing it this way and some people are doing it that way. But you'll find that your developers, especially if you've got strong seniors, everybody will start to come together and say, this is the way we're going to do it. And when you let the developers figure that out, yes, it's going to cost you a little time, but in the end, you'll get a much better product and a much more cohesive team. And finally, at that point, we get to working unit tests. We've actually got something that when we run PHP Unit, it actually says, yes, this has worked. And then you get to development, and development is what we are all working for, and you get to a regular cycle of development where the developers will write unit tests, and they will write the code, and then they will check it in, or run PHP Unit, and everything works, and things are good. Here's the payoff, though, okay? I know this only happens on projects I'm working on, but the client comes in and says, everything's great, but I need it to do this new shiny. And you go, okay, we can handle that. Because, see, you have unit tests that prove how the system works and prove that the system works as it's expected right now. So you don't have to go through and change this over here and say, oh, wait, no, that's not working because it broke something over here, and keep moving and juggling and trying to nail the jello to the wall. You've got unit tests. So you can move straight into the, let's write the unit test for this new shiny. Okay, we have unit tests. Yes, they're all failing, but we have unit tests. And then we write the code for them. And as we write the code, we start seeing the unit test turn green. And then we get to change complete. And now you have your application that you could prove from the beginning worked just fine, but now it works fine with this new shiny. You're happy, your developers are happy, your client is happy, and that's the most important one. Now, we talked about PHP Unit. That is the framework that I use, but there are several others out there. Simple Test, Code Conception, or Codeception, BHAT. You see Mockery up there. Mockery is the mocking system that works best with PHP Unit. So, like for my database, I can tell it what a database is supposed to look like and what it's supposed to take as input and what it's supposed to return as output. And this way I know my unit tests always return to me the same thing every time, so it's easy to test for that. So you're going to need you're going to need some kind of mocking system. There's several others out there, but that one's the most popular by far. Now, I'm not here to push any single unit testing framework for you. Matter of fact, I would not even suggest, if you're the project manager, that you attempt to tell your developers this is the one you're going to use. Go to your senior developers and tell them we want to start doing unit testing. Which testing framework should we use? And the right one for your team is the one that they come up with, because they're the ones that are going to have to use it. So, Roy, we got another poll?
Yep, thanks, Cal. So poll number 2 is, do you currently perform unit testing at your company? And select either yes or no, whatever is applicable to you, and we'll give a few seconds for people to answer that. And it was surprising. I was trying to find some research on how teams approach unit testing or the numbers behind it from an industry perspective, and it was surprisingly difficult. But I did find a paper published at the 2014 IEEE International Symposium of Software Engineering. It's a mouthful there, and they surveyed 225 developers across different languages, C++, Java, PHP, from 29 countries. And when the participants were asked what makes it difficult to write a new unit test, the top 3 answers were identifying which unit code to test, isolating the unit under test, and determining when you do the test, what to check. That survey also found that 12% of developers perform no testing at all, unit testing or otherwise, so it's quite an interesting survey. So it looks like the majority have responded. So close the poll and share the results. And the answer to, or the majority, seems to be no, we do not perform unit testing at their companies, which to me, coming from an embedded defense software background, that's really surprising. But I take it, Cal, and for this audience, that's maybe more a correct reflection of the trend. Cal, are you there?
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry. No, I'm here. I absolutely had my mic muted and I had launched right into the answer to your question. Yes, this is actually what we normally see at conferences, and when I go talk to developers at user groups, is we're still not up to the 50% mark, even though for the past 5 years the community at conferences and things like that have had 2 main focuses, and that's security and unit testing. Those have been just perennial topics for 5 or 6 years now. I will say this, I am pleased to see that it is as high as 39%. I can remember several years ago when that number would have been 10 or 12%. So it is, we are making progress, but hopefully at the end of this webinar, a couple more of you will say, yes, this is important to me.
Great, excellent. Thanks.
Okay. So we've talked about what unit tests are and the benefit part of the benefit you're going to get from them. Let's talk about why you want to do unit testing. Well, first thing is, in a nutshell, here's the reason that every manager should not only encourage their developers to write tests, they should be requiring them to. See, every project I know of is under pressure to do more and less, to do more with less. And part of doing more with less is eliminating doing it over. I come from the background of writing software where the conventional wisdom used to be take your first shot at anything, write it, and it's your prototype, and then throw it away and rewrite it from scratch. Well, that's great if you've got greenfield development, if it's your passion project and you're not really under a deadline. But if you're under a deadline to get a project out, that is a very wasteful way to do it, and that's why we don't do it that way a lot anymore. Doing it over costs money. And developers like me who write the code without thinking it through, well, we think it through in the code, and I'm guilty of this. I do now write unit tests for a majority of my projects, but like I was sitting down last night playing with Alexa, because I got a new Echo Dot, and it just came awake. Let me unplug that. And I was playing with that, and no, I don't have unit tests for that code yet because I'm really not sure if I'm going to do anything with it. But when I have a project that is laid out before me and I have specifications, I try to always write my unit tests first, because otherwise, here's what the loop looks like. I'll rough out some code, I'll refine that code a little. Oops, I forgot something, I forgot a requirement or something like that, so I go back to roughing it out, and I go around this board over and over. Well, the problem is, every time you pass go on this board, you pay the bank doesn't pay you. And I've been a developer manager and I've been a project manager, and I know as a project manager I start each project with a bag full of money, and every time I pass go I have a little less of that money, but my goal is to finish the game with money left in that bag, or at the very least spend my last dollar as I'm finishing up the project. I don't want to go over. I don't want to have to go back to the bank and explain why I was not able to do this. See, when I was a project manager, I saw projects as more than just lines of code. Developers see what's on the left. This is the project, and I don't want to get my developers out of that mode, but I see it as much more. And I get it. It's the job to get to the finish line with as much of that money left in you as can, but that's exactly why you should spend the time writing unit tests, because they help you do that. And if your current project management style does not allow for time to create unit tests, quite honestly, to be blunt, you've got to change your style. And if all you're seeing here is, Cal, what you're saying is I've just got to give my developers more time to write code that my client, whether it's internal or external, is never going to pay for, that's not the point. The point is being able to prove your system works every time. You've got to look beyond arguing about the value of the unit test. Their value has been proven over and over again. We've discussed the financial benefits of the unit tests, but there are others. Tim King wrote 7 reasons why unit testing is important to managers, and I'll include a link to this blog post in the notes at the end of this session. Actually, there were 12 in the original. I've narrowed it down to 7 that are really important just to managers. And the first one is unit tests prove that your code actually works. There's no more getting up in front of the client to do a live demo and hoping and praying that it works or that something's configured right or something like that. Unit tests prove at any moment in time that your code actually works. Once you know the code actually works, it's very easy to improve the design or refactor without breaking your code, because you know you have a unit test that says this is what the code is supposed to do. This is the behavior we're expecting from the code. And as long as you've got that, you can change the internal code all you want as long as the unit test continues to pass. Unit tests demonstrate concrete progress. Now, if you're doing test-driven development, then your developers will sit down with a piece of code, and the first thing they'll do is write unit tests. So they'll write 5 or 6 tests, and they'll put 10 or 20 assertions in those 5 or 6 tests, and then they will run it, and everything will fail. You'll have little red Fs instead of dots. But as they start writing code and as they start implementing this, those turn from red Fs to dots. So when you run it, if you check out the project in the morning when they've checked it in the evening, and you run the unit test, you should be able to see the dots slowly appearing and the Fs slowly disappearing. Like I said before, test first forces you to plan before you code, okay? No more of this, what we used to call seat of our pants coding or cowboy coding, where I'm just going to write this stuff and I'm going to keep hammering at it until it works, and then I'm going to check it in and leave. Write the unit test first. You can prove at that point that you have succeeded, because if the unit test tests the behavior that is supposed to happen in a given unit, then you know it works, or you know it doesn't, and you've had to think it through. Test first reduces the cost of bugs. One adage that has been time-honored since I started programming and is still rock solid is that the most expensive place to fix a bug is in production. The earlier you can find that bug, the cheaper that bug is going to be for your team to fix. So if you're writing your unit test first, then you've had to think through everything. You've written your tests and your assertions. You know the behavior you expect. So if anything slips in and starts causing the code not to behave exactly how you think it should behave, then you know about it immediately. And a lot of systems, especially the interlocking systems that we've got these days, if you change something way over here on the left, you think that's not going to bother anybody, but it actually bothers something way over here on the right, well, you'll know immediately because you've already got your tests written for both of them. And then unit tests just overall make for better design. Now I'm not talking red buttons versus blue buttons. I'm talking architecture design. And the reason it makes for better design is you've had to think it through. You've thought through the big picture. You now, before you start writing a single code, you know everything that needs to be done. And I guarantee you, as you're thinking this through, you're going to hit upon several things that, hey, I don't really need that, or I can use this code from over there instead, and you'll begin to see that your code will be cleaner and you'll write less of it, which is also a bonus. And then finally, regardless of what you think, it's faster than writing code without tests. If developers are forced to think the problem through, then the process of thinking it through is faster when you're writing the unit test than if they're just thinking in code. Because if you're writing the unit test, you're saying it has to do this, it does this, and I need to do that, that, and that. If you're thinking it through when you're writing the code, you'll go, I think it needs to be, no, doesn't need to be that. Let's try this. No, what if I make a call here? You spend more time running down rabbit holes when you're writing without tests. When you're writing with tests, you know exactly what you need to be writing.
Hey, Cal.
Hey, Roy.
Hey, we have a question from the audience that's probably pertinent to that last slide you just showed, and I'd also remind anyone in our audience to please enter your questions into the questions tool on the right side of your screen. We have a few queued up, and this current one here is any advice on how to write good unit tests?
Practice. Quite honestly, practice. You saw the one that I wrote and that I showed you, and that was, like I said, one small one. But the best advice I can give you is just to keep your developers at it. You will find that they will, the more that they do it, the faster they will get at it, and they'll start thinking in unit testing. And that's the aha moment for most mid to senior level developers, when instead of giving them a project, they see code or they see a solution, they start seeing unit tests. And when they can see the unit test, writing the code is secondary.
Great, thanks. So experience. Practice makes perfect.
Yes. And they say, what is it they say? Bad mistakes come from experience. Experience comes from bad mistakes, or something like that. So it's a vicious circle. But it's one you've just got to keep practicing at it. Hey, if you're still on the fence about why you should write unit tests, do this. Go Google for why write unit test. There are 12 million results. And quite honestly, the first time I made this slide, there were only 8.6 million results. It's now up to 12.2 million results. Blog posts, Stack Overflows, quorum questions, all of this on why you should write unit tests. We've moved really beyond the question of are they a good value. And most of your developers are already sold on it. When I talk to developers, the number one reason they give me for why aren't you writing unit tests on every project you do is my managers won't let me. They already want to do this. They see the value in this. And not a single one of those developers that I asked gets paid per line of code that they write. They just know that their projects will be better if they're allowed to do it this way. So let's talk about when. Not when should you write unit tests, but when should you start letting your developers write unit tests? Well, there's an old Chinese proverb. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And that really applies to unit testing as well. The best time to start writing unit tests or adopt unit testing as a best practice was before you started your last big project. The second best time is right now. And I know, yes, that means to some of you, you're going to have to stop a big project and you're going to lose a week to churn or 2 weeks to churn just getting your developers to start writing unit tests. Even if you're halfway through the project, 2/3 of the way through the project, you're still going to see benefit because those unit tests are going to save you, if nothing else, bugs in production. And that is a project budget killer. Somebody who's been doing this for 36 years knows. I have put enough bugs in production myself to know that is the main, or one of the main financial values of unit tests. So yes, stop development. If you look at me and say, Cal, I just can't do it, well, you'll have to take your chances on this project, but at least before you start your next project, get your developers involved in unit testing. So,
hey, Cal.
Hey, Roy.
Hey, we have questions coming in fast and furious, but this one is particularly relevant to the when topic that you just talked about. And the question is, I find it difficult to write unit tests up front as you often have to set up and prepare objects to be able to test their outputs. Do you have the same experience, and how do you tackle this problem?
Yes, I have the exact same experience, and the answer does not change. Your unit tests when you start writing will fail. Okay, I mean it's designed that way. If you're doing test-driven development, your unit tests are not going to pass even if you get it perfect. The main reason is you've not written the code for that. Now, PHP Unit is smart enough to say to know that if you call an object or if you instantiate an object that has not been written yet, it's just going to tell you I can't do that, and it's going to move on to the next one. But yeah, you're going to know it. But if you are practicing test-driven development, then at the very least you know, in my case, I knew I needed an account object. I know I needed a message object, and to support the other things that the message object had to do, I know that it needed a property called text. So you're thinking it through in your unit test and not in your code, and you're basically writing a contract with either yourself or the developer that's going to be writing the actual code that says this is what it has to look like. Now, are you going to get it right every time the first time? No, you're not. You're going to get halfway through a project and realize, oops, I messed up there. And at that point, you're going to adjust your unit test to show the behavior that you actually wanted that you're not yet testing, and then you're going to go and finish your code. That answer the question, Roy?
I think so, Cal. Thanks.
So we know the how, we know the why, we know the when. Now I said that we know the what, we know the why, we know the when. Let's talk about the how. How do you write unit tests? Well, it's real easy. the way I started doing it when I was doing when I was managing teams was no, I did not follow my advice and kill an existing project and start over with unit testing, but I had a project that was about to start, and so I went to the team that was doing it and I said, okay, we're going to do this test first. And I said, now you think it through, you do what you need to do. Well, the first thing they said was, okay, none of us know how to do this properly. What do we do? So I had to go find training for my developers. Now, at that time, it wasn't real easy. These days, it's a lot more easy. But train your developers first. Get them all on the same page. Even if you've got senior developers that look at you and say, Cal, I got this, okay? That's fine. Send them through the training too. It will be a refresher for them, and they're going to be there to help your junior developers as they struggle with some of these concepts. They're going to be there with them, and when everybody comes through the same training, then everybody is on the same page. Once you've got your developers trained, pick a project. If you've got a project that's about to kick in, start with that one and commit to it. And commit to it understanding that you've got that first 2, maybe even 3 weeks that is going to be chaos and organized chaos, and you know, it's not going to feel right and you're going to be panicking. Just work through it. Give them time to do it. Things will settle down. I've done this enough to see it every time. Your developers will start thinking it through. Once they think it through, they'll write their tests. Once they write their tests, they'll write their code. You'll start seeing all the red F's disappear, all the little dots appear. You'll hook it up to continuous integration so that every time something checks in, you know if the build is broken or not. And the other upside to that is, especially in systems that are already in production, is if you know and can prove that the system is ready to go into production at any time, then migrating into production is not difficult at all. You know, you don't have to go through all of the steps of having the client look at it again to make sure everything's right and have somebody sit there and click this button and try to log in and all this. You've got unit tests that show that everything is right. So at any given point, you can roll a new version into production with confidence. But it all starts with training. Keeping your developers trained, keeping them on the same page, whether they're your senior developers, your junior developers, your interns, whatever, making sure that they all understand how to do this is very important. Now, luckily, we have a course we helped to do, or we worked with one of the premier unit tester or unit test gurus in the PHP community, and we developed the PHP Unit Testing Jumpstart course at Zend. Now, most of our courses are 2 to 3 weeks long, 2 hours a day, every other day, and we dive deep. This one is not that way. This is one of the reasons I recommend highly that you send your seniors and your juniors through. Is this is drinking from the fire hose. Our Jumpstart courses are one-day courses. This is a 6 to 7 hour course. So you're not losing your developers for multiple days. You're going to lose everybody for one day and then it's over with. But we teach the basics. What is test-driven development? This is, you know, the very basics of this, because everybody needs to understand the foundations. Then we go into modularizing the code. We talk about the assertions. We start talking about things that sounds like spies, doubles and dummies, mocks and stubs, all of this kind of stuff. But it's very important that people understand how to write these so that they know when to write them. Then we talk about data providers, which ones to mock, what to mock, that kind of things. And then we end up the day running code katas, and some of them you'll get through, some of them we leave you with to practice. And a code kata, if you're not familiar with martial arts, a kata is just a series of moves that you do over and over again that help you build that muscle memory. I'm oversimplifying because my days in karate are long gone, but that's basically what it is. And a code kata is a very simple exercise that you code over and over again. My favorite one, as an example, is calculating bowling scores given 10 frames of bowling. Okay. Sounds very simple. It's actually very complex, but once you understand how to do it, then you can write it over and over again, and you can tweak this one thing and see if this one thing works differently, or if this can make it a little better or a little faster. And so we finish it up with some actual code katas. Now, we don't practice mocking up how do you add two numbers. A lot of people will, you know, if you look at some of these courses, you know, the first thing you'll do is you'll see how to write a unit test for the add function. No, we're not interested in that because nobody actually writes a function to add two numbers together in a production system. We work with code that looks like your production code, and that's the beauty of the code contest. This was developed by one of the leading unit testing gurus in the PHP community. It's delivered by Zend certified engineers. None of my trainers are allowed to teach a class until they have passed the Zend certified engineering test, and all of them stay current. The best advice I can give you to keep your projects on track, to keep your developers happy and keep your sanity so that you go home at night feeling good, and hopefully you go home at 5 o'clock every night feeling good, is start utilizing unit testing today. Roy, we got any more questions?
Yeah, we have several questions, Cal, and I would encourage any others to please submit their questions now. We do have some time, but even if we don't get to your question, Cal will answer them in a blog that we will follow up with once this webcast has ended. So we will get to the questions, and I'll just go through them in sequential order as they came in. So how to know what to write a unit test before writing the code? So I guess the question is, how do you what kind of test do you write before writing the code?
Well, again, that goes back to experience. The very first unit test that I ever wrote, I was asserting, well, you know, I would create an object, I would set 5 properties on that object, I would call a method, and then I would do asserts on all 5 properties to make sure that they're still the same, even though the method never did change that. And it builds up your number of asserts very quick, but it doesn't really test anything. A lot of people strive for 100% code coverage, and I heard somebody say the other day that's kind of like striving for reading 100% of the words in a newspaper. Only some of them are important, the other ones aren't. So you have to figure out what parts of your code are actually important. The system that test that I showed you from, the system that came from, I now have unit tests on all of my models, and I have 100% code coverage in all of my models. I have about 50% code coverage in my controllers, but there's a lot of ancillary things that don't really do anything important. They just, you know, they're helper functions and stuff like that. I don't generally write unit tests for things like that. Test what's important. And as to how you figure that out, that will only come with experience.
Great, thanks. So the next question is, many of the benefits you mentioned require full coverage to actually get. Do you have any advice for an organization that is just getting started with testing?
Yes, do not fall into the 100% code coverage test or trap. Okay, you don't have to have 100% code coverage. Matter of fact, the project that that test that I showed you from just passed 50%. Now I'll probably hit, if I keep going the way I am, I'll probably hit about 65% code coverage on that particular project. And looking at the code that I have determined I am testing everything that's important. And that's all I'm really concerned about. I'm not shooting for 100% code coverage simply because I don't have the time or the luxury to do that. If you've got spare developers and you just want to have that 100% badge, hey, knock yourself out. But that's not going to get you, that last 20% is not going to get you the same value as the first 80%.
Right, makes sense. So focus, prioritize, and give the rest to an intern.
There you go.
So the next 2 questions I think are kind of the same, and they're just getting to the point of how do you handle unit testing when your project requirements are constantly changing. So you mentioned that it's better to write tests first before the source code, but what if your project requirements constantly change?
Well, that's really something outside the scope of unit testing. The answer to that is learn to say no, or learn to say, my favorite version of no is, hey, that's great, why don't we do that in version 2? There's never a version 2. No, you're in constantly changing specs, unit testings really shine, because if everything is under constant flux, being able to prove that the system still works is vitally important. So if you're getting a change request every week and you don't have the luxury of saying, no, I was just joking about that. If you don't have that luxury, then at least being able to prove that before you start writing this particular change request, the system is working, and before you check it in, the system still works, then that's vitally important, especially if you're moving fast. This helps you keep away from the move fast and break things. You just want the move fast part.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, I started with PHP 3 and functional PHP. What would be needed to support unit tests? There are about 500 functions or more spread across many files. First
of all, my people, okay? I started with the beta of 4.0, so I totally understand. It's a mindset. If you are still using version 3 or 4 or even early 5 PHP, then you're going to run into some problems. Starting with about 5.3, that's when PHP really settled down and started becoming the language that we know today. But that's really the minimum version. If you're not to that point, then I would suggest that you get to 5.3 before you try to do any of this. But once you do, yeah, you're going to have to understand objects at least to write your unit tests, because I don't know of any functional unit testing frameworks. You can test functional code, that's not a problem, but you're going to have to work with objects to do it.
Okay, great. We still have questions coming in, Cal, so I'll just fire them off as quickly as they come in. So the next one is, regarding training the developers and their testing skills, what do we actually test in our projects? Do we test only some specific units of code, like important logic, or all of the code? Also, do we or do we not test the database?
Okay, that's two separate questions. So let me tackle the first one first. You test the important stuff. Don't worry about the unimportant stuff. Or as Roy alluded to, and I have done this before, give it to an intern or give it to the new person. There is absolutely no better way to get somebody integrated into a project than let them spend a week writing unit tests on something that's not yet tested. Just give them an area and say, go start writing tests, and they will start figuring things out. You let them do that for a week or two, and they're going to be part of your system, or they're going to be part of your team. They're going to understand your system. I actually, in the talk that I gave at ZenCon, Groupies, Roadies, Rockstars, I talk about the fact that an open source, if you want to get into an open source project but you're not sure how to, find an area that's not unit tested and start writing unit tests. The team will love you because, you know, a lot of open source people still hate to write unit tests, but the team will love you, and if you do it long enough, you're the expert on that system at that point. So, you know, even though Roy was joking, yeah, use unit testing to integrate your new people into a project, but still test the important stuff. Now, as to the database, unit tests are not there to test whether your code can connect to the database or not. Quite honestly, if in production you can't connect to the database, you got bigger problems. Okay, the best you can say in a unit test is you want something that tests how your code behaves when it fails to connect to the unit or to the database, but that's still something that you can mock. Connection to the database is beyond the scope of that, and the same goes for connection to any API you're using. I use Twitter's API an awful lot, okay, and I write unit tests for code that uses Twitter's API an awful lot, but I mock Twitter's API. Basically, I will hit Twitter's API, take the whatever comes back, I will save it out to a text file, and then I'll use mockery to mock up the connection and return that same result set every time. First of all, I can tell exactly what's going to come back every time and test for that. And secondly, I don't care if I'm actually connecting to Twitter, because my unit tests are not testing is Twitter up right now.
Okay, great. The next question is, I've written so many unit tests that it takes almost an hour to complete the tests. Is that normal? How long should testing last on average?
Okay, first of all, you rock, okay? You get that. Second of all, you need to check, there's a friend of mine named John Wage over in Nashville. He is CTO for a company called OpenSky, and they have this exact same problem. OpenSky's unit tests were so large that it was taking 30 minutes to run just the complete suite of tests. He wrote a project, and I don't have it in my list here, but if you go Google for PHP Chuck It, not chunk, C-H-U-N-K, but chuck it. Actually, I think I covered this on DevZone, and he did a lightning talk about it on Nomad PHP. So any of those places you can probably find information on it. But basically, he uses Docker to break your unit tests up and run them in parallel. And it cut his, I want to say his was originally 30 minutes, and it cut him down to about 5 or something like that, because he runs, like 10 Dockers wide and stuff like that. So look into PHP Chuck It. It will dramatically reduce the amount of time it takes to write to run your testing suite.
All right, thanks, Cal. The next question, I think you've already answered bits and pieces of this in the previous answers, but I'll ask it anyways. How would you recommend starting unit testing for a project that is in production already? It's fairly large, it has no unit tests at all, and has new feature requests coming in.
Okay, this is what we call legacy code, and my friend Paul Jones, who's an ex-Zender, he actually worked on the very first version of Zend Framework. Paul has a book on legacy code, and I don't have it handy, but if you Google for Paul Jones legacy code, you will find it. Invest in that book. Matter of fact, if you've got multiple developers, invest in multiple copies of that book, because this is the exact problem he talks about, is how do you manage legacy code, how do you bring legacy code into current code, and how do you write those unit tests first. Because it's probably procedural code, it's not going to be easy to test, but before you start making massive changes and doing massive refactoring and getting it into object-oriented and PHP 7.1 and all that, I just strongly urge you to spend the time to write the tests, because the last thing you want to do is break something and not be aware of it. And that's what happens so many times in these refactoring projects.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, I've started hearing about property-based testing. Have you ever used it, and if so, would you recommend it? One library is Eris, E-R-I-S, which seems to be a port of PHP to QuickCheck.
I have never heard of this at all. I will have to go investigate that. Thank you. You've just ruined my weekend now. No, I'm kidding. I will go into. I will look into this. But no, I've never actually done property testing at this point.
All right. The next question is, what if the results of a function isn't clearly defined yet? Should you still write the test first, or write the test as you code, or write the test after you code?
No, you should think about it before you write the tests. If the purpose of a function isn't clearly defined by the time you're ready to write the test, then I would say that you're not ready to write the test yet, much less write the function. That's the beauty of unit testing, is it forces you to think these things through when you're not writing code. Now, that having been said, there are in my /tmp directory right now on the computer that I'm using, there's probably 10 or 15 different test files. Test.php, does this work.php, oops.php. I still think in code, but I do it in very, very small pieces, and once I get it working the way I want, then I understand how to write the unit test. And once I understand how to write the unit test, the code falls into place. But yeah, there are times when I've got to figure out, what does, like last night in all this working with Alexa, I found out that JSON encode in PHP has a JSON print pretty flag. And if you use that, instead of getting one long string, you get this nicely formatted JSON string that JSON parsers will still parse, because white space doesn't mean anything. And I just found this fascinating, and so I was playing with it for probably 15-20 minutes in several different places. And like I said, I've got a test JSON encode.php in my temp directory. And I put them there because when I reboot my computer, it wipes them all out. There should be nothing there that needs to survive the reboot of a computer. All
right, thank you. Next question is, if you mock Twitter return and Twitter suddenly changes its return, how are you covered? I'm assuming that Twitter's API is any unversioned API.
Yes. First of all, we all mock Twitter. No, that's a problem, but it's not a problem that unit testing can solve. This is a problem that API vendors have and they struggle with. I've got a good friend of mine, Luke Stokes, over at Foxy.io, and he's done an awful lot of writing on APIs and versioning APIs and how that should be done. I know MailChimp MailChimp puts a version number in their URL. So, and the old version stays live for a couple years after the new version's out, and they've just recently done away with the new version. All of my unit tests for code that uses the old version still pass, but if I actually run the code doesn't work. So this is something that you can't solve with unit testing. You're going to have to, if Twitter changes its API, you're going to have to change your Twitter mocks, and once your Twitter mocks change, your tests will fail, and then you can make your code work.
Excellent, thanks, and I agree, we all mock Twitter. So we're approaching close to the end of our time here, so let's have one final question, and then we'll go to the close. So the last question is, how does acceptance and integration testing fit with your approach?
Those are two separate things. Usually, when I was managing development teams, acceptance testing was something the project manager did with the client. Sometimes there were developers in it, sometimes there weren't. But that's the client going, yes, this is what I agreed to pay for. And integration testing is putting it all together, and there's some great frameworks to do that, but that's usually the that's usually the purview of the QA department. Most of the time, my developers, and I worked on fairly large projects, I had the luxury of having a QA team that's what they did, was check this stuff out. But it is a separate process, and developers write unit tests, and then if you've got to have integration testing, and there are times when it's very important, then I would suggest either a QA person or dedicate somebody on your team that they're the integration testing person, because that's a little bit different of a mindset than unit tests, okay? And you do a lot less mocking in integration testing. Integration testing is almost like putting it into a staging area where you actually want to make sure everything works exactly the way that it's supposed to, with all of the inputs that it's supposed to get.
Great, thanks, Cal. We've come to the end of our presentation. So for the questions we didn't get to, we'll provide a blog shortly, and Cal will provide answers to those questions. Any closing comments, Cal?
No. For the past 10 minutes, I've had up on the screen the show notes for this. You can go to any of these blog posts. These were when I was researching the topic, these were the ones that stood out as the best of the best. Now, they don't all apply to, they aren't all written about PHP, but they all apply to PHP. So, if you're still on the fence about whether you should or not, don't listen to me. There's a lot of smarter people out there. Look at some of the things that important people have said about this.
Great, thanks a lot, Cal. Thanks for a great presentation, and thanks to our attendees for attending, and as well as some wonderful questions that provide the opportunity for Cal to go deeper into unit testing. And hopefully everyone found this useful for you to take back to your teams and to your own practices. As a follow-up to this webinar, we will send out a few resources for you to take the next steps towards better unit testing, and I would encourage anyone to visit Zend.com to see more about our unit testing course, as well as our other courses ranging from PHP security, PHP fundamentals, Zend framework, etc. So thank you everyone for attending.